Hello, everyone. I'm Spencer Ruckty. I'm the author events manager at Third Place Books here in Seattle, Washington. I am ridiculously happy to have Mark Haber and Matt Bell with us tonight. They're going to be discussing St. Sebastian's Abyss, Mark's second novel from Coffee House Press, which just came out this month. First of all, I want to invite you all to use the chat to say hello, tell us where you're calling in from. Chat is open and for you to use, as long as you please use it respectfully. Only use it to heckle Mark if absolutely necessary. And second, I'll say we have a stellar lineup of virtual and in-person events this season at Third Place Books. On June 13th, we're teaming up with Community Bookstore in Brooklyn, as well as Exile in Bookville in Chicago to host Jesse Jazuska Stevens, who's the author of The Visitors, in conversation with the very recent Pulitzer Prize winner, Joshua Cohen. You can find our full events calendar and sign up for email newsletter at thirdplacebooks.com. As I mentioned, that chat is open. We encourage you to use it respectfully tonight. When Mark and Matt finish with their discussion or get done fighting about syntax, whatever they have planned, we have some time for your questions as well. So if you have questions for our authors this evening, please submit those in the Q&A window below, which is separate from the chat window at the bottom of your screen. We also have closed captioning for those of you who are interested. Just hit the live transcript button at the bottom of your window to turn that feature on or off. In a reminder that this event will be recorded, so if you have to miss anything, we'll be emailing that recording to anyone who registered. And the last thing I'll say before we introduce our authors is that if you order St. Sebastian's Abyss from Third Place Books, we have a special surprise offer. I will handwrite you a personal, totally illegible list of recommendations based on your taste. All you have to do is request your personal recommendation from me, Spencer, in the comments field at checkout. My opinion is worth very little, but this is just part one of my plan to get Mark on the bestseller list and finally get him on the Seth Meyers stage, which is the ultimate goal, I think, for any author. And now, without further ado, I am pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. Mark Haber is the author of the 2008 story collection Deathbed Conversions and the novel Reinhardt's Garden, which is longlisted for the 2020 PEN Hemingway Award. It is a funny and dour novel about the nature of melancholy set in a South American jungle. Mark is the operations manager at Brazos Bookstore in Houston, a bookstore that is famous, I think it's fair to say, for its dedication to literature and translation and the most interesting literature from independent presses. Joining Mark in conversation is Matt Bell, the author most recently of the novels Appleseed, Scrapper, and In the House Upon the Dirt Between the Lake and the Woods, a finalist for the Young Lions Fiction Award. Matt teaches creative writing at Arizona State University, and amongst his accomplishments, he publishes a monthly Substack newsletter with reading recommendations and writing exercises, and he is also an envious runner. I could go on for a very long time about how much I love St. Sebastian's Abyss, and I think it's a testament to Mark's presence in this literary ecosystem that many of my favorite writers like Hernan Diaz and Adam Ehrlich Sachs also love this book, as well as my favorite booksellers. But this book is about two former best friends who are made to reunite after a long falling out, two friends whose careers have revolved around the painter Count Hugo Beckenbauer in his masterpiece, St. Sebastian's Abyss, a work that established both men as important art critics and simultaneously destroyed the relationship because of each critic's obsessions. Is Count Hugo Beckenbauer a real Dutch Renaissance painter? Great question. Questions like this are a part of the joy, I think, of reading Mark's work. Even the smartest readers feel gullible before his novels, and we're made to participate in the serious joy and fun of that orchestration. So let's all now enjoy some of Mark's breathless sentences. Please join me in welcoming Mark Haber and Matt Bell.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Matt, for agreeing to talk with me. I'm a huge fan of your work. Thank you, Spencer, in Third Place Books.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mark, for being here. One of the things I'm already thankful for Spencer is that so often these events get introduced with no one describing what the book is, and now I don't have to read my description of the book because Spencer already read his. It's so good.
Yeah.
I love this book so much, and for those in the audience, I had the good fortune of reading the novel in manuscript last year. I read it cover to cover on a train in France while traveling to Paris from Bordeaux, which is a very fancy way to read any novel, which is really perfect in some ways for this. Reading in transit felt like a perfect move since much of the novel takes place during a transatlantic flight, with the narrator reading and rereading and reminiscing around an email sent from the deathbed of his former best friend and fellow art critic, obsessed with the painting Saint Sebastian's Abyss. The next day, I was in the Louvre, and the day after that, I was in the Musée d'Orsay. Mark and I were just talking about maybe pronouncing things wrong, and I feel like, are these French words? I don't know. And in one or the other, I saw one or two of the most famous paintings of Saint Sebastian, which felt like a good omen that I had just come out of Saint Sebastian's Abyss and was seeing Saint Sebastian. But yeah, I really love this book. I've continued to think about it. I've continued to sort of be excited about it. I'm so glad to be here with Mark. So Mark, hello.
Hello, and thank you, Matt.
Oh, please. Such a pleasure. Danny says he read it on a plane. Everybody should buy the book tonight and then immediately book a trip. I think that's the thing. This is brought to you by JetBlue. Please immediately use the Saint Sebastian's Abyss code when you check out to get nothing off of your flight. Mark, could you tell us where Saint Sebastian's Abyss started for you? I know the artwork at the center of the novel is invented. Was there another artwork that inspired you, or did it begin elsewhere? Did you begin with the object that connects Schmidt and the narrator, or did you begin with the relationship between them?
Well, you know, it's funny. My last book, Reinhardt's Garden, I remember almost vividly where I got the idea and what the feeling I had when I started this. And I don't recall how I got the title, why I decided to call it Saint Sebastian. I don't remember. But I know that I'd read 3 or 4 novels in the last few years that were about art, fiction, novels about art, and I really liked it. And I like that world. I like that world of description and the people that kind of populate the art world. And that intrigued me. And I wrote the book chronologically, so it really is written the way that the reader reads it.
Wow, yeah.
A couple chapters were, had to be moved around, but really minor things. So the way I write usually is that I have a kind of a vague idea, and as I'm going, it's almost like drawing a line. Things start to collect as I'm going. So as I'm telling this story about a friend, he's going to go see his friend on his deathbed in Berlin. All the other things kind of accumulate as I'm going, as I progress. So I didn't have a big layout or a plan. And then the painting also just kind of accumulated details. If you've read it, and if you haven't, forgive me, but the Holy Donkey. And I think one review said, and it's very true, is that the painting in the book is very, very vivid and also very vague. Yeah. So I describe things like a cliff in a city that might be Jerusalem, the donkey, apostles. But yet when you try and picture it, you can't, I don't think you see anything. And that was intentional. That's left for the reader.
Yeah. I mean, you have one of the most stressful cover design problems, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because like you obviously have this artwork and this visual thing that maybe but can't be shown and shouldn't be shown, and is as you said, like vivid and vague. I can see Sarah and Hayden and other people being excited about the Holy Donkey. As I was rereading the book today and yesterday, I was like, oh yeah, that Holy Donkey is so good. Yeah. Even the phrase Holy Donkey is kind of a delight.
Thank you. Well, I did my launch in person last Friday in Houston, where I live, and I mentioned about, I was talking to Daniel Pena, another great writer, about comedy and timing and cadence, and Holy Mule is not funny. It doesn't have that. And then Holy Donkey, it's all about sound, and then suddenly it's something that's not funny becomes funny. And the good folks at Coffee House, I really wanted to have a little wink at the reader, and that's why there's a donkey on the back of the book, because everyone who read it, that was like the thing they would talk about, the Holy Donkey, exactly. And then a friend of mine, this is my last donkey digression for the moment, said, I kept hearing about the Holy Donkey. I read the book, I don't get it. And there's nothing to get, except of course his obsession with that aspect of the painting. So
yeah, I mean, that sort of that once you hear there's something to get, the horror of going into it looking for the symbol, right, is like just a thing people liked about the book, right? Yeah, it adds this kind of weight. Exactly. Yeah. So You're going to read in a minute. I say people are already putting questions in the Q&A, which is fantastic. Sometimes people have a hard time doing this webinar format. Please put questions in the Q&A as we're talking. We'll come to them at the end. So thank you so much for doing that. You can also put them in the chat. Obviously, we're seeing the chat and are being responsive to that too. Mark's going to read in a minute. I'm going to ask him one more question first. In an interview for your last novel, you said, "The joy of writing for me is what you discover in hindsight or while you're doing it. Especially in fiction, you don't write because you know things. You write to find out. You write because you have questions." And I was wondering, what were some of the questions that animated St. Sebastian's Abyss? Do you feel like you arrived at answers to them? Sometimes all I feel like I do is maybe get to like a more refined version of my question.
Yeah,
which is, at best.
That's well put. Right, at best. You probably sometimes end up with more questions than when you started, but I think one of the questions I had, one of the concerns when writing the book was, and I think part of that is being a bookseller, is the idea of taste and gatekeeping, and what gets to be decided to be high art and low art, and is there a difference? And that idea of being an elitist, you know, and Schmidt declaring that all art died after 1906. And so I definitely learned some things. I also learned in hindsight after finishing the book that I think one of the themes in everything I've written, or most of what I've written, is I have characters who are desperately trying to escape mediocrity. They fear being mediocre. And I think you've got two characters, Schmidt especially, as well as the narrator, as well as my last book, that these are people that are horrified that they're every day. And they end up making fools of themselves in an attempt to elude mediocrity, I think. So I definitely learned that. I look back, I said, I really kind of create these characters. I'm not the first that has done it, obviously, who really are frightened of being mediocre, of not being remembered, perhaps.
Yeah. When you said that, like, fear of mediocrity, I like felt that in my bones, right? You know, just like I immediately heard in my brain the like career that I always use is at least I'm not this thing, right? Like my particular thing that I think is the most mediocre person a person could be, like the sort of terror of that. Yeah.
And then the other thing that you said, another topic, of course, was the idea of what gets to be called art and what isn't. And you get that a lot. I mean, working in a bookstore, like, oh, that's, you know, and we're all guilty of it. We're all human, that you kind of shrug off something that maybe is, I don't know, genre literature. It's a romance, it's a thriller. And there's something that's kind of innately human. Like, I want people to like the thing I like, but you also want to protect it. And you don't want maybe everyone to like the thing you like. But it's this weird thing. And at the end of it, if you're a decent person, you just want people to enjoy the things that they like, right?
Yeah.
But it definitely brings up, I hope, these questions. So
I love that. Well, let's hear a little bit from it. I know you got some stuff to read. Let's let people hear from the book. Thanks so much, Mark.
Sure. No, thank you, Matt. I'm going to read just a couple chapters from the beginning, and then one sort of a chapter in the middle, and then one towards the end, just to kind of give an overview of the book and the tone. And I will start from the beginning. After reading the email from Schmidt, I knew I'd have to fly to see Schmidt on his deathbed in Berlin. After rereading and reflecting on the more emphatic passages of his relatively short email, I was convinced I'd have to visit Schmidt one last time as he lay, in his words, dying in Berlin. Although we hadn't spoken in years, the email, sparse and cruel, hadn't surprised me. It felt suspended, as if it had been written years before and was merely waiting for me to open and read it. The tone of Schmidt's email hadn't surprised me either. Schmidt had been my best friend and confidant, my spiritual companion in art history, and art criticism. Our interests drawn to the Northern Renaissance, especially Dutch mannerism, and more specifically than that, the painting St. Sebastian's Abyss by Count Hugo Beckenbauer. St. Sebastian's Abyss, the focus of both our early studies and later our entire careers. Schmidt's guidance and affection, and later our deep friendship, were founded on our mutual love and adoration for St. Sebastian's Abyss, at the time a little-known work by a little-known artist, hence all the more moving. We'd taken countless trips to Barcelona, where St. Sebastian's Abyss was, and still is, on display, along with Beckenbauer's two lesser works. In Barcelona, we beheld St. Sebastian's Abyss in person, the first time to make sure the obsession we shared was authentic, and every visit thereafter because of the obsession itself. I read and reread Schmidt's relatively short email, going as far as printing it so I could underline specific passages during the long flight to Berlin. I printed 3 copies, in fact, 2 for the flight and 1 to tuck in my luggage in the event of some mild misfortune, spilled coffee, a tear, pages forgotten in the restroom, and so on. I remembered I could always print a copy at the hotel in Berlin, and for a moment felt silly, but this feeling passed because it would be absurd not to print something as vital as the deathbed missive from my spiritual and artistic confidant when I had the means at my disposal. Thus, I printed 3 copies to read and underline, fold and unfold, disregard entirely if I felt like it. The choice was mine, the point being to have a choice, for I saw the next 12 hours as torment, soaring over the Atlantic, condemned to the solitude of my own thoughts. No desire to read anything but the email, wholly occupied with studying, analyzing, and construing all 9 pages of Schmidt's relatively terse email. An email, by the time we descended over Berlin, would no doubt be dog-eared and worn, pondered over and vigorously scrutinized, because I hadn't spoken to my best friend, meaning Schmidt, in over 10 years, 13 to be exact. And Schmidt, being Schmidt, the less he said, the more he revealed about art criticism, our subsequent falling out, and naturally, the most sublime painting in human history, St. Sebastian's Abyss. Our decades-long friendship had crumbled when I'd said that horrible thing. What at the time I felt was mild and innocuous, merely an opinion, was indeed, Schmidt was happy to tell me and later remind me, a horrible thing, a stain on my relatively scandal-free career, a major blunder and indiscretion that wouldn't be easily forgiven. I'd not only said that horrible thing, he said, but written it too, in my 4th book, Serpent's Pastoral, an exploration of the mythological imagery in St. Sebastian's Abyss. And Schmidt took me to task for both writing and saying that horrible thing, later declaring, almost happily, that horrible thing I'd said and then written would follow me for the rest of my career, which, in his opinion, had a rapidly approaching date of expiration. This didn't happen. Whatever Schmidt believed was horrible about that horrible thing I'd said and then written went largely unnoticed by academics, critics, artists, even our friends. Moreover, the esteem in which my opinions were held only grew, and the more acclaim I received, the more Schmidt resented that horrible thing I'd said and then written regarding the most radiant painting in human history, St. Sebastian's Abyss. Something I couldn't take back, he'd insisted, since it was in writing too in my 4th book, Serpent's Pastoral, and rehashed in my 5th book, Harlequin's Affection. I went on to write a 6th, 7th, and 8th book, all popular and all dissecting different aspects of St. Sebastian's Abyss, that glorious painting that had brought Schmidt and me together and likewise torn our friendship apart. All right, I'm going to go just to a little bit in the middle of the book, and this is just a little bit more about Schmidt. I think from the first 3 or 4 chapters, you already have an idea of what kind of person he is. I'm not always certain what art is, Schmidt was fond of saying, but I'm always certain what art isn't. This was said at exhibits around the world where Schmidt and I had been invited to speak. Walking by the paintings, clicking his tongue violently, Schmidt informed anyone in earshot what they were looking at was invariably not art. And there was a good chance, he added, that it was trash. The difference between something being not art and being trash was practically indiscernible. And sometimes Schmidt deemed a painting not art only to turn around and correct himself by calling it trash. Other times, albeit rarely, Schmidt would call a work trash only to later backtrack by saying it was simply not art. Art is rare, we agree, because humanity no longer produces artists. We live in a world of monotonous excrement or excremental monotony, the difference being immaterial because the point being the world is awash with monotony while simultaneously overflowing with excrement. Excrement and monotony bursting from every direction, a world that has not dulled or impaired, but in fact annihilated the inspiration necessary to create artists. Anything even remotely resembling the inspiration necessary to create artists has been wholly annihilated. Artists are akin to those giant tortoises from the Galapagos Islands, we conclude, those enormous turtles that have gone extinct and will never return. All right, this is the last chapter I'm going to read. If you've not read the book, it's just a little bit of kind of backstory is that they've had a falling out, these 2 friends. They've written several successful books, and now they're writing books almost against each other. And they've got followers, they have factions. And this also kind of ties in with the religious symbolism in the book, and that their followers are called disciples, even though these 2 art critics are always claiming they're not religious, but their followers are apostles. Okay. Sequestered in my expensive apartment, I paced and pondered, fretting about the release of my next book, The Assemblage, and whether it should be before or after the release of Schmidt's next book. Because if Schmidt's next book was, as he claimed, the final word on Count Hugo Beckenbauer and St. Sebastian's Abyss, then where would my next book, The Assemblage, stand? And I looked out the window of my expensive apartment at the expensive city below. Not only an expensive city, but a prohibitively expensive city, a city filled with millions of souls living their lives, oblivious to art, to doom and decay, a million weary souls indifferent to the apocalypse, crossing streets, getting out of cars, trading in joy and grief, discontent and despair, the endless emotions to which we're all invariably prone. None of them caring about art, none of them knowing, in fact, the first thing about Count Hugo Beckenbauer or St. Sebastian's Abyss. And I considered calling my editor, asking if I should have the assemblage published sooner or later, meaning before or after Schmidt's book, what Schmidt called the final word on St. Sebastian's Abyss, because I didn't know if Schmidt's final word would indeed be the final word or merely a way of drawing me out, because the final word, I'm sorry, I lost my day. Because each of our books have become an attack, a response, each one more virulent and personal than the last. And I no longer remembered whose turn it was to retreat or attack, even though our acolytes knew full well the score. For there were symposiums awash with our disciples, meaning mine and Schmidt's, who had no qualms about debating and arguing, frequently and doggedly, in order to claim victory in our names. Meanwhile, my girlfriend, the obvious rebound from my second wife, scoured the art magazines for gossip and hearsay regarding mine and Schmidt's disciples, meaning the articles written by our disciples against one another. And I heard her cackles from the other room as I perspired and obsessed over the assembling of my book, The Assemblage. And were the chapters in the correct order, I'd ask myself? Were the chapters ordered to benefit my argument? Namely, the greatest possible configuration to deflect any arrows of criticism shot by Schmidt and Schmidt's faction. And meanwhile, the obvious rebound from my second wife was shrieking, insisting I come out. You have to read this, she'd cry. My God, the balls on these assholes, meaning Schmidt's followers. And the more she insisted I pay attention to the outward affairs of our faction, meaning Schmidt's and mine, the more I shut myself in, the deeper I cocooned. Sometimes to quell my anxieties, I dream of jumping out of the window of my expensive apartment and crashing upon the sidewalk of my very expensive city. Bones crashed, everything black. No more books, no more paintings, no more books about paintings. No more rebound from my second wife, who didn't love or even like art, who admired at most only the idea of art, who enjoyed the scandals and rumors that floated around art like mosquitoes around carrion, picking the meat and bones from art until nothing resembling art was left. No more anything ever again, I'd muse, a nothingness like the brushstrokes of dark plum, both above and below the center of the second monkey painting. A blackness so dark, it was cosmic and never ending.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you.
One of the hardest things in these kind of events is being the sole audience member, but it's also very nice to be read to by myself. So everyone else should cheer in the chat so Mark can see some movement. There we go. I think that's good. As it maybe disappears from the chat, Tyler Barton said he shaved his beard so he could have a Schmidt stash for this event, which I feel like is the right move.
Thank you, Tyler.
As soon as you talked about Schmidt's excrement and monotony. I was like, I want a t-shirt that just says excrement and monotony so badly. I feel like
Yes.
you have a lot of Schmidt fans in the audience, even as the antagonist of the novel, right? Schmidt's such a compelling figure.
Thank you.
Yes, it's good. New Coffee House Press merch ideas. This is
I
all
love
I
it.
want.
Yes.
I'm just manifesting in the universe. I wanted to ask you a little bit about a kind of confidence. So I think like Borges has come up as a point of comparison for your work, especially maybe your last novel being a garden novel. There's always a garden, you know.
Right.
But I'm thinking about him as I was writing questions for this event too, because you share his ability to add artworks or text to the real world with confidence. You mentioned some of the protagonist's books, Serpents. I've already lost my own handwriting. Serpents, Pastoral, Harlequin's Affection, The Assemblage, these sort of invented books. Obviously, St. Sebastian's Abyss itself. The picture isn't real, its painter isn't real, but I'll bet a lot of readers at some point stop and do some Googling. They start sort of wondering what's real and what's not in a book of this, because it all seems so plausible. How do you do this? What does it take to make an invented text or artwork real to a reader? Was it challenging sort of producing these descriptions of Beckenbauer's 3 works that appear in the book?
Yeah, that's a great question, Matt.
Thanks.
And absolutely. It's weird because I don't have an artistic bone as far as painting or drawing in my body. However, I really do think of when I write akin to painting, whereas when I love to see the text on the page and see lots of italics, the titles of things, the names of books or movies or art. So I love that, the look and the feel of that world on paper. And so I think it gives it a dimension. I love thinking up titles, but also it's like painting in that you want the titles to fit and not be a distraction. So it's almost like if you're painting, you want a title that's muted or that fits in with the rest of the book, i.e. the painting. So it's a great joy. And I love, I think part of it is I love the possibility of invention. I love putting these things in here, not to fool the reader, not to make people Google, all the time or at all, but really to kind of show this tapestry of possibility, of things that might be real and might not be. And it informs the world that I've created, I guess. This world that's, based on reality. It's a realistic book in a sense, but it's still also very fictional.
Yeah. I love books that feel additive, like they're adding to the world. Like
yes.
That sense as you're reading them, like the world is like bigger, or like you've added sort of like a possible dimension. You made your own little branch here in the history of art. Feels really exciting to be around.
Oh, thank you. It's something I think I probably picked that up a little bit from Borges, probably a little bit from Bolaño. Although I think a lot of the things Bolaño probably did and the Savage Detectives were real movements and like Mexican literature and things like that. But it's just something I love to do. And as I said, I don't want to fool the reader. It's not like I'm trying to be a prankster, but I really do want to enrich the text with possibility, with the idea that there's these things that kind of exist. And if you give a name to something that doesn't exist, a fictional title, it can still create an image in the reader's mind.
Yeah, I think that's right. God, the last couple of years have been such like a feeling of sort of like a constriction for people, or like a diminishment, that a book that makes like, as you said, like the possibility of invention or this idea of like a bigger world, there's some real joy just in being around that sort of expansionist sort of move. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I want it to be but I do want it to be. It deals with heavy themes, but at the same time, if someone calls the book a comic novel or it's funny, that's a great compliment to me. I don't take any offense at that. So yeah,
maybe I'll skip a question and we'll stay on this because we're talking about humor a little bit. One of my favorite recurring bits in the book is the monkey pictures, which are the two lesser works by the St. Sebastian's artist that hang beside it. Schmidt and the protagonists have developed a way of dealing with the horror of these pictures. So maybe we'll just read. I think this is the first time it shows in the book. Sometimes when we visited St. Sebastian's Abyss, the narrator says, we are forced to cup our hands on both sides of our face to block out the first and second monkey paintings and to hem in the most sublime act of human glory, St. Sebastian's Abyss. It's a really funny idea in the first place. There's later appears another scene where like another museum goer mimics it but does it to the wrong painting. I really just sort of love it. When I obviously spent my time in these Paris museums right after reading your book and was sort of like thinking about that all the time. I'd love to hear about the role of humor, and I think maybe especially like absurdity in your work. It feels like absurdity is thing. I think of you as like a very serious person, a very serious writer, a very serious bookseller, both in intent and practice. But your books are a lot of fun, and there's a lot of humor in them. And I've just like, where did you find the sort of humor in characters like Schmidt and the narrator?
Well, it's funny, and remind me if I can to go back to the blocking out the paintings, because there was something I was going to say about that. But the humor comes really naturally. It's weird. It's not that it's not hard, but it's also not. It's not easy, but it's not hard. It just kind of comes, and as I'm writing the story, and that's kind of how I see that my mind looks at things a little bit askew, and that's how I like to exaggerate things in the story, but the right things. And I think this ties into the humor. I'm a huge fan of Saul Bellow, and I love how he will mix highbrow and lowbrow and mix them. So he's got these intellectuals that are, owe money from gambling to the Chicago Mafia. So you've got these people that are like, professors at Ivy League school, and they're playing poker at night and they lose their money because they're very smart, but they don't know how to relate to the world, to the everyday. So I love the idea of these really self-important art critics that have written hundreds of thousands of words about a piece of art standing there like this. And so it's that mix of wanting to write something that's very smart about smart people, but also kind of poke fun at them. So it's that mix of high and low.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
When I was in a class of Gordon Lish's, and he talked about like all the best writers can do high and low simultaneously. Like if you can
Yeah.
only do one, you'll always be sort of limited. That sort of
Wow.
your inability to move between those two spaces will cripple your work. And there
Yeah.
is something that's true to that. Like especially if you're trying to only be high, as these
Right.
characters are often trying to only be high. That
Absolutely.
the absurd parts of them, or the parts of them that are weaknesses, come out of their pretension in a certain way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Daniel Pena made a point. We were talking about this before we started, Matt, about how you write a book with questions, and when you're done, you actually sometimes have more. And he said something. He goes, well, I feel like they were blocking out the monkey paintings. And that's kind of like a statement about where we are today with our opinions. And we only want to look at the one view we have. We don't want to look to the side. I was like, wow, yeah. That's great, Daniel. That was there. I wanted that to be there. I wasn't just trying to be funny. So there's all these things that end up coming into the book from different readers, which is the beauty of it. Literature is very subjective. So
yeah, it's just a joy to feel someone like Daniel thinking on top of the work too, right? Just like that. That's so what you want out of readers.
Yeah.
One of the things that's sort of related, I think, to where we get the absurd is coming out of obsession. I think obsession is one of the things that makes a character feel real to me. Of course, you have to have obsession to write, but the obsession becomes like a lens through which we see the world of the character, right? It's the way they think. In this book, the narrator and Schmidt, who's kind of the antagonist of the novel, have the same obsession, but different ways of approaching it, which actually feels really challenging in some ways. How did you come to inhabit like their different worldviews? Were there existing sort of models for the kinds of critics they both were, or was it just sort of trying to find the space sort of between them? I'm just curious how you,
Yeah, a lot of it comes when I'm writing to just, I guess this is going to be vague, but the tone. Like when I'm writing, I'm trying to get the tone of the narrator, and by the tone, not just the way he says things, but the way he describes Schmidt and the quotes he takes from Schmidt. So whatever Schmidt says in the book is obviously selected from the narrator, his friend or frenemy. It's funny, I've never used the word frenemy in my life, and then when the book came out, I see the word frenemy all the time, which I heard the term. It's just never been in my.
It's like when you buy a car, you suddenly see that car everywhere. You bought a
exactly,
and now you.
Yes, frenemy, and so I wanted the narrator to be. I think it's akin to Reinhardt's Garden in that the narrator is a little more sympathetic than maybe the antagonist, and so they've got obsessions, and I think they differ. And Schmidt would probably happily agree in that Schmidt is a European. And he's more of an elitist. They're falling out. The terrible thing I read about that he says is very innocuous. He just says, why can't everyone just enjoy art? Why do you have to get this degree and do this? If someone gets joy from something, can't they? And that to Schmidt is the end of the world, And I think Schmidt says that art died after 1906 because he doesn't want to be. That allows him not to have conversations with these dead artists. Everything that he wants is kind of sealed. And it can't be disturbed anymore. He can talk about, Rembrandt or whoever because they're gone, and he can dismiss living artists and say, "Well, I don't need to take you seriously because you're alive." Yeah.
It's funny because as you were saying that, I was thinking about. I think we'll all do that probably at some point. It seems like very famous writers. There's always articles at the end of their lives where like, oh, I haven't read a new book in 10 years. I'm only rereading. And there seem to be like two things working. One is like, if I knew I had 10 years to live, I might just reread my favorite books again.
Yeah.
That makes total sense to me. And the other thing is like, when you're 70, the things people are doing that's new will be challenging and probably should be challenging. And you might not, I'm not 70, maybe when I'm 70, I'll be super cool. All the bands I go see are 19-year-olds. And I'm like, you guys are great.
Nice. That's good. That's good.
But I totally get there could be a point where like, it is really comforting to have the artists you write about be dead or have them be gone or to have like, I could see how that's easy.
Yeah, because it's kind of a one-way conversation in a way, Yeah.
It's very, very safe, obviously.
It is, exactly.
So the characters have obsessions, but I think like books have obsessions. And one of the things I love about writing a novel is that it becomes this like lens to see the world. I often think of it as like a form of attention. And I'm curious what your writing this book made different about the world for you, or how did this book become a lens for you to see out from?
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think a little bit of it goes back to what I said before of that interest in what like gatekeeping, what gets to be decided to be high art or low art. And so I thought about that a lot while writing the book, as far as the tone of the book and their arguments about what is art and what isn't, what gets to be allowed to be called art. Well, it's trash. Well, I'm going to backtrack. It's not. It's medium. It's not trash. It's just not art. And so I think the lens I looked through was just the lens, and I wrote the book very quickly. So other things I've written, it's taken longer, and it was definitely kind of a longer lens through which I saw the world. And obviously, the less time you spend writing a book, the less time you've got that lens. But I think I looked at the way that we kind of discuss music, books, film, all of that, and I have no answer. It's more like these are just the things I think about, and ego, and also that idea of what you like and how that represents you, especially if you're in high school, the bands you liked, and this is kind of a statement of this is who I am, and I think the narrator and Schmidt are very attracted to, and they say it in the book, to the Renaissance, because of they're very melodramatic characters. Obviously, they're very melodramatic, and the Renaissance and the art could be considered melodramatic. Like in the everyday modern world, we're not worried about angels, and we're not worried about saints and things like that. And so that world speaks to them because it's larger than life. Literally, it's everything is very, very symbolic. So I think I thought about the idea of that, what you love and your taste. A lot about taste, how your taste represents you.
Yeah. I mean, I can really feel the protagonist navigating that for himself. And also, like Schmidt is both the antagonist and kind of like the cool friend you have that you can't quite live up to. I mean, it really can feel like the way the Schmidt's shaping the protagonist more than the other way around, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And
Schmidt's like the older friend that's having a cigarette and going, "This is cool. You should have a cigarette."
Absolutely, yeah. And I could, the book can only be structured that way. Probably it couldn't be the other relationship, but I can really feel my own experience of that sort of in life through that. I want to again invite people to put things in the Q&A. I know people have already.
Sure.
I'm going to ask maybe two more questions, one of which I think goes with some things in the Q&A already. So, and then I'll try to bring in everybody else's. I think both of your novels are in some ways about the intoxication and sublimeness of influence, and about like the possible dangers of being overtaken by your influences. Or erased by your influences. But I was wondering, I knew you talked to us a little bit just offhand as we went, some of the writers who influenced you in this book, and also are your relationships to your influences as active as Schmidt and your narrator's relationships with St. Sebastian's Abyss?
I love it. Well, I'll go with that last question first. They're not that obsessive because if they were, I don't think I'd be able to poke fun at those people. I'd be like, wait, that's me. That's me.
Right?
So no, but I think I know for a fact, Matt, that when you discover a writer you love and maybe you read all their books, there's this really deep relationship, that they speak to your soul, really. And so influence is huge. And I don't try, but I proudly wear the influence I've got in my books. I haven't reinvented the wheel, but I do think I've got my own, hopefully, little skew to things. But I know that I like the Hungarian writer Laszlo Kazahorkai. Yeah. He's an incredible writer. He's also very tedious. He can be boring, but I love him. But what I'm trying to do, I guess, this is almost like my aesthetic, is that I want to write a book, like you said, obsession. I love writing that's static, that just kind of keeps going, like Thomas Bernhard. But I want to bring, I want to kind of inject a little silliness. I want there to be a love of language. I want it to be, and this comes into taste of it, I want it to be literary. And when I say literary, I just mean that you have a love of the language. I know everyone has their definition of literary. And to me, that just means you do care a lot about the craft. That's all. Yeah. I want there to be a love of language, but I want to write something like, if you've ever read A Compass by Matthias Enard, it's a New Directions book, and it's beautiful and it's dense and it's so beautiful and it's so boring, but it's so good. And so it's like, I want to write a book like Compass, but I want it to be very, very funny. I want it to be ecstatic and intelligent and bring all these things in, which could be fictional art and books and movements, but also have it be ecstatic and very, very, funny in a way, or absurd.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I
So
love
that's
the
kind of
idea
where
that
my
the
aesthetic comes
ecstatic feels like such a good,
Yeah.
man, what a good North Star to sort of have to move toward the ecstatic feels
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
good
And
place to
it's
be.
not for everyone. It's not for everyone all the time, obviously, Matt. You know,
Yeah.
it's there's times when I'm like, I'll open up to reread a Bernhardt. I'm like, oh no, this again with the whole no paragraphs. Come on. So I get it when someone, you know, people come to the bookstore and I'm like, does your new book have chapters? I'm like, it has chapters.
I know.
Yeah, don't worry. But I really that type of writing is I'm very drawn to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love your book is not a difficult book. I love difficult books. And I still with my students often will say things like, what would it look like if you took a 5% step toward the reader? Like what would like a little
Yes, that's what it is.
Yeah. Like this much, like chapters. Chapters is a 5% step toward the reader.
It is.
Yeah.
It's an olive branch. It's an olive branch. And yeah, so I'd like to write something like Compass, but have it be as funny and take like 5 or 10 steps towards the reader.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And all I've read of his is Zone, right? Which is
Zone, yeah,
like,
exactly.
Thing, right. Yeah.
Really difficult. And I haven't read Zone, but also like Cross the Horkat, where it's beautiful and it's very religious and spiritual. But kind of do it you know, with lots of hijinks. So,
Yeah. I think that's good. Add hijinks.
Exactly.
This is sort of my last question. It dovetails with a couple of people in the Q&A, and then we'll take other questions. So I teach an MFA program, as you know, and so the conversations I have about writing and about art and about process and about what books are supposed to do, it inevitably takes on a like interior MFA feel. There's the things people talk about in academia, right? And every time I publish a book, I'm reminded of all the other ways people talk about books. Like my agent doesn't talk about books the way we do in academia, and my editor doesn't, and the publicist, the marketer, and like using like completely different language. And of course, readers and booksellers have their own sort of language for talking about books. One of the things I love about publishing a book is being around booksellers talking about books instead of academics talking about books.
Right.
You've been a bookseller as long as I've known you. I think you said maybe 10 years?
Almost, yeah.
Almost.
It's definitely the longest job I've ever held by like so I've been there. I've been at Brazos, I guess about 9 years probably. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. I was teaching high school.
Bookselling has, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
no, you're fine. I interrupted you. I just said I taught high school when we first moved to Houston for a year, and then I got into bookselling.
Nice. I'm curious what bookselling has taught you as a writer. How does it influence like the way you write, and maybe also like how has it taught you to talk about what you write and the kind of books you're writing? Because I feel like those are two separate sort of things.
Yeah, no, they are. And it's funny because I think like with anyone, if you're having a good day, and you know, there's days when you just kind of like the coffee wasn't strong enough, and someone's like, "What about this book?" You're like, you know, there's not a camera on me. It's okay, and I'm just you don't do very good. And there's days when you're just like, oh, this book, and you know, you're excited, and so I think the way you talk about books, at least in my experience, is it comes from a place of passion. Obviously, it's not a car dealership. You're not, if someone decides to get the book or not, hardcover or not, it's not going to keep the lights on. So it's very low risk, you know, as far as trying to sell someone a book. So you want to sell them or share with them. I don't even think about selling it, but share with them something that that you think they're going to love too and be passionate about, and maybe discover, you know, a whole nother world or a whole nother avenue of writers, whether it's, you know, books from Poland or whether it's, you know, writers from the Great Depression, etc. I thought about this a lot. I think from bookselling, I've learned a lot about the aesthetics of books. And I mean, like the book as object, you know, when you get, when you see a really nice,
show your beautiful book. It's so beautiful. It is also like in person, like great. So yes,
Coffee House. They are their books are just gorgeous.
Always.
Yeah.
Strong aesthetic.
A very strong aesthetic. And so like when you see a book by like a tiny little New Directions book by Caesar Ira, and it's got a weight and the way the text is, the font of the text. So I think bookselling is kind of informed me as far as aesthetics in a way. I know that's general, but the way that I like a book to look. And it's funny because, you know, I'm going to be 50 in July. So when I started bookselling, I was like 40. I was 41. Right. So it's definitely informed me in a lot of unconscious ways. But it's not like I started bookselling when I was like 22. I mean, I was 40. So I already came to the bookstore with I'd written a book of short stories, and I already came knowing the things I liked. However, working there has shown me things I never would have seen. I never would have been introduced to if I hadn't worked there. That I think probably reaffirmed things I already liked, and definitely introduced me to things that I wouldn't have known otherwise.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm going to move to the Q&A, and we'll take some questions from the audience. You can stop being interrogated by me. Hayden Casey, who's one of my former students and a great writer, says, one of my favorite aspects of St. Sebastian's Abyss is the length and wildness of its sentences, often to hilarious effect. How did you navigate the novel's relationship to syntax, and what was the process of landing on this style?
Oh, that's a great question. So yeah, I mean, style is just as important to me as the story you're telling. So I kind of picked up this style with Reinhardt's Garden. When I wrote Reinhardt's Garden, like something opened up. I almost said, okay, I saw clearly, not even almost, I did, okay, this is how I want to tell stories. This is the thing I'm good at. And as you know, as a writer, you can bang your head against the wall for years and years. And then suddenly when I sat down and started writing Reinhardt's Garden, I'm like, okay, this is the thing I'm good at. It not only, if I write a story and the syntax, I'm going back to this, answer this question in a certain style, but it helps the story I'm trying to tell, this style. So not only does it lend itself to the story I'm trying to tell, but it also, it works in unison, if that makes sense. So it was really, I wrote St. Sebastian's Abyss really shortly after, probably the same year Reinhardt's Garden was accepted. Oh, wow. So I was probably in that same mindset. And it was really just a natural projection of wanting to write, you know, kind of a Bernhardian, a book influenced by Thomas Bernhard, these kind of cranks, these misanthropes, these kind of know-it-alls, but an art book. And I knew it would be slim, but I was also influenced by all of these books of essays and multi-genre, mixed kind of essays and memoirs that are coming out that are very fragmentary. And I wanted to write a book that had very short, maybe a chapter was just a paragraph. And Coffee House publishes a lot of books like this. So does Grey Wolf Press and lots of great presses. But you know, you see something you like and you attempting to imitate or copy that thing, it's still gonna come out your thing. You know, especially when you get a strong enough voice and you know what you're doing. So me trying to imitate these fragmentary little books, maybe books by Dorothy Project, that you would never look at a book of essays by a French writer from the Dorothy Project and then look at mine and go, oh, those are similar. But me attempting to do that created these very small, kind of short chapters, kind of the polar opposite of Reinhardt's Garden. And then the syntax is, I really love those kind of labyrinth sentences that curl around, and it's all about cadence and reading out loud and figuring out the way that things sound. So, but it goes back to being ecstatic, that obsession. And I think it lends itself to that style.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think for a novel like St. Sebastian's Abyss, like, especially you said you wrote it kind of fast, like there, obviously a lot of it is like mulling on the past of these characters. There's a lot of backstory in it because the present of the book is really abbreviated. It's a flight and then sings Schmidt. But like the prose is where the narrator's like personality lives. Like it's entirely in that syntax, right? Like that's really who he is. Exactly.
And I love, like you said, Matt, you articulated it perfectly, is I love voice-driven fiction. And I love fiction where the voice is basically its own character or even the story. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great question.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Hayden. Novelist Brian Castleberry is here with us tonight, whose work I love as well. He asked, we're still talking about voice a little bit. And he says, I love the use of repetition in the narrator's voice, the constant circling of particular terms and ideas, even that, like what's the phrase, like the thing that you said or the thing that can't be said, like
the horrible thing, or
the horrible thing, right? The sort of the recursion of that, right? Can you talk about that decision and what it says about these characters, this sort of use of circling and repetition and recursion?
Yeah, I think it was kind of influenced indirectly or even directly from reading Thomas Bernhard. And, you know, he writes these books that are unbroken paragraphs, and he gets these motifs, and he kind of, it's very cyclical. He studied music, so his music is very, it's very based on music and rhythm and cadence. And what I found I'm doing, it's almost unconscious, but I did it with Reinhardt's Garden, and I did it with this book, is I find either a phrase or an item or a thing, and it becomes a running gag or a motif that I just keep going back to over and over. And I'm actually working on a tiny novella right now, and the guy's in a castle. It's akin to kind of Reinhardt's Garden, and he keeps talking about that he's pacing in the great room, and great room is italicized. I don't know why. I'm just like,
your italics are a thing. You italicize your thing, you repeat around. Yeah.
I do. So I'm like, so he's pacing in the great room, and I don't know why, but great room to me said it's got to be italicized, because in this character's mind, it's the great room. That is the big room in the castle, and that's it's got a name. You know, there's probably a banner that says great room, so you know where you are. But so it really, it's something I started with Reinhardt's Garden. I don't think I'm the first, but I think I've made it my own a bit in that I use it obviously for comedic effect. And I know in Reinhardt's Garden that the main character, who is basically always thought he was dying from something, he keeps saying he's got I can't remember the disease now, but it's a fictional disease, and so 4 or 5 times throughout the book he brings it up, and it's meant to be funny, but also kind of show the obsession he has with his own health.
Yeah. It's fun. I'm so glad you brought up the italics. I think you have like some of my favorite italics. Like the monkey picture is always italicized. The thing that you said is always italicized. You know.
Yeah.
And there is like a joy just seeing on the page. It's like, oh, this is going to be one of the chapters where we talk about that, which is probably all of them. I'm going to combine 2 questions. Tyler asked. Tyler with his Schmidt stash asked, what are the recent last few years novels about art that you read? You mentioned this early in the conversation. And then Sarah Malley also asked, like, just what are you reading? So maybe we can combine those 2 sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. So I ended up, my wife went to grad and undergrad at art school. So she's my boss. She's the general manager of Brazos. This never was, it was not organized. It wasn't planned. This is just kind of how things happen. And so I bought a lot of her art books for terms, for just the way to describe painting. So I would use words like, and it seems so simple, but you forget as a writer that just the word as simple as shadow, you know, and foreground, that if you use it the right way, I don't still know a lot about art, but I was creating characters who knew a lot about art. So there's that fictional thing of trying to make characters believable who went to Oxford, and will not let you forget that they went to Oxford, to the Ruskin School, that they know a lot about art. So I studied her art books. As far as novels and fiction about art, which I think is what drew me to writing this book in the first place, was a wonderful book that came out from a Mexican writer. She writes in English, Chloe Origis. She's a Mexican writer, lives in London, and she wrote a book, not her most recent book, called Asunder. It's a paperback book. It's called Asunder, and the main character is a guard at a museum in London, and it's beautiful, it's quiet, it's thoughtful. So I really enjoyed that book. Amina Kane's Indelicacy, I thought it's just a lovely book. It feels very timeless. Yeah, it almost feels like it was written in the 18 or 1900s. It feels it's really just a beautiful, quiet book. And it's funny because I love these books that are very quiet, and then I always feel like my books are like, you know, kind of like, you know, hitting readers over the head. So I'm like, sorry.
I know this feeling. Yeah.
I know. Yeah. So you're like, you know, you kind of go and advance apologizing. There's definitely a few more. Trying to think. Obviously, Old Masters by Thomas Bernhard, which all takes place one day in a gallery, and one friend is on a bench waiting for his friend to come, and his friend arrives, and he sits on the bench the entire book, kind of observing his friend and telling these stories, but he never really kind of approaches him. So that was definitely an influence. But Asunder and Indelicacy are both, I think, really great books.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so great. I know Spencer's going to come back on and implore everybody to buy your books in a second. So I'm going to ask, I think, a question that puts you in the spot from Nigel Perry, which is, what aspect of St. Sebastian's Abyss are you most self-impressed with?
Wow. Oh, okay. Wow.
That's a cruel question.
That is.
Think about yourself for a little bit.
Right. Yeah.
Right before Spencer sells everyone your novel.
Right. Okay. So do you mean by if you can ask him, does he mean self-impressed by the book or by the painting? Does he mean like
the aspect of the novel? So of your own, what's the thing you're most excited about your own book? What's the thing that gives you pleasure in your own book?
Okay. Honestly, hopefully, I'm very proud that I think I was able to do a lot in a small space, that it's expansive but also sleek. I think someone called it sleek. So like Caesar Ira, it's small, 90 pages, but it's maximalist. It feels like there's a world in a very, so I'm proud of that, I guess. So yeah,
absolutely. I love that conversation we were all having online the other day about like maximalist books that are also small. Like it is really, and obviously Caesar Ira is really that. I think this is too. So it's great. Spencer, I can see you again, so I will stop talking and let you talk.
And Matt, thank you so much.
Mark, my pleasure. Absolutely.
Really appreciate it. I'm a huge fan of all your work, so thank you.
Mutual.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's please everyone thank Matt Bell here for being a wonderful moderator. Matt does a stellar job every time I see him online. I hope to meet him in person one day and actually like see the magic happen live. And of course, Mark, congratulations on the new book. We're also excited about it, and this is going to be the thing that I put into people's hands over the holidays. When as they say, book selling becomes easy because people just want something in their hands and then they take it from you, and they don't ask any questions. You could give them literally anything, and they're like, okay, great, this is for my niece now. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, they need 6 copies of Saint Sebastian's Abyss.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see, I mentioned this earlier, I'd like to see hashtag trending tomorrow. I'm using all these hip terms, donkey digressions. So let's get donkey digressions trending. And I just want to say before you and everyone, thank you for attending and for letting me kind of spout about my book and listening to Matt and I talk about books and literature. And if you've read the book, thank you. And I hope you enjoyed it. So, yeah.
The only thing Zoom is good for, talking about books and literature. So
yeah,
thank you everyone for coming out tonight. Please go buy a copy of Saint Sebastian's Abyss from your local independent bookstore, or of course Third Place Books. I was very serious about writing personal recommendations or doing any number of humiliating things to get this book into your hands. So I just want to thank all of you and have a wonderful evening and be well, and go read a good book.
All right. Good night.
Have a good night.